So our theme for this morning's session is the future of healthcare, the drive for more personalised care. Our first speaker is Alastair Campbell, and we're delighted to have Alastair here today. Alastair, as many of you know, amongst other things, is a writer, a great communicator, a strategist, best known for his former role as the press secretary and spokesman for Tony Blair. For those of you who don't know, Tony Blair was my local TD when I used to live in Sedgefield. So I tell Alastair it was me who put Tony where he was now. Alastair is still active in politics. He campaigns in the UK and overseas, and at the moment splits his time between writing, speaking, charities, and consultancy. And we're very lucky that he's spending some of that time speaking with us today. In recent times, he's become increasingly more involved in an area very close to his heart, mental health charities and causes. I think he's a great ambassador for mental health. There's some copies of his book available for lots of people here. So without further ado, can I hand this over to our first speaker, Alastair Campbell.
Actually, the books, by the way, you've given a bit of a false impression there, I'm afraid, because they've all gone. So unless you got one given to you, forget it. Or you can go on Amazon. But don't expect, and I'm sorry. And I'm going to start, by the way, by introducing. So, well, you sat in the front, okay? So this is a real problem when you come to anything to do with healthcare, is that you're surrounded by people who know about healthcare. So you may hear, your clock's not moving, by the way. You may hear that I've got a bit of a cold. Now, I decided last night, I slipped out early from the dinner, I went to bed, I took loads and loads and loads of different drugs, and I whacked my asthma inhaler, and I got these and that and the rest of it. And then I didn't sleep that well, so I got this morning, I went into the steam room, and I thought, right, half an hour in the steam room, I'll be fine. I'm coming out of the steam room, and this lady here, who I now know is called Carolyn, and who's got some amazing Theresa May-style shoes, which you should all take a look at. She comes over to me, and she says to me that she was sitting last night at the dinner with a paediatrician and an oncologist who both turned to her and said, Alastair Campbell really doesn't look well, does he? So thank you for being so concerned about my welfare. And you're right, I'm not well. And the minute I get back tonight, I'm going to go and see my GP, and I've got no doubt at all he's going to whack me full of antibiotics again, and away we'll go. And one of the reasons I'm telling you that story is because we all are completely open when we're not feeling very well in our body. So I've got a cold, so what? So it might be a chest infection, so what? There's nothing to hide. And if you take it up a few notches, if I was, let's just say that yesterday, before coming here, I was involved in a charity football match, and I broke my ankle, okay? And I'd still have turned up, and I'd have maybe been on crutches, but I'd have been fine, and I'd have told you the story about that, and it'd be okay. And let's then go into maybe more serious conditions. Let's say I had cancer, and let's say I was being treated, and let's say I had chemotherapy, and my hair had gone, and I'd still turn up, and it'd still be fine. And you'd all still understand, because we understand the language of physical illness. We know how to deal with it. I don't know, but I suspect if I'd have phoned up the organisers this morning and said, you know what, I'm having a really shit day, and I mark my depressions on every day, 1 to 10, and I'm sorry, but it's 7.5, and I can't get out of bed. And I don't know, but I think the truth is I probably would have forced myself out of bed. But we don't do that. We're not open about our mental health in the way that we are about our physical health. And I'm going to tell you a little story. Here we are at a health summit. And as a British person, even though it's got massive pressures on it and big challenges ahead, we're all in Britain incredibly proud of the National Health Service. But let me tell you a story that illustrates the point that I'm making. Virtually every time I do a talk about mental health, I'll talk about my own issues, I'll talk about my depression, I'll talk about the time I had a psychotic attack, I'll talk about alcoholism, I'll talk about all sorts of things that I know about. And I'll urge people to be open, and I'll say that, you know, until we actually feel we can be as open about our mental health as we are about our physical health, we're not a civilized society and we're not a civilized world. And I'll say all that. And then at the end of it, this always happens. You get a little group of people come up, and I'll wait. I can see them over there. I can spot them a mile off. We've all got a bit of kind of, you know, we understand other people. We can see in their eyes if there's stuff going on. And I watch these people, and I call them the whisperers, because they basically wait until the people who want a selfie have gone, the people who want a book sign have gone, the people who want to say, I want to ask you this question that I didn't want to ask in public, they've all gone. And then these people, the whisperers, there's usually 2 or 3 in every audience. And they're hanging back, and then they come up, and one of them says, thanks for you doing what you're doing on mental health. And I say, why are you whispering? Because I've just been very, very open about it. But the reason they whisper is because the stigma and the taboo is still there, and they don't feel that they can talk about it. So within the NHS, I was at a conference recently, and a nurse, a National Health Service nurse, came up to talk to me afterwards. She was a whisperer. And she told me her story. Said she was bipolar. When she got the depressions really, really bad, they were really, really, really bad. When she was manic, she wasn't so manic that she couldn't work, but it was difficult. But she said when she gets the really bad depressions, she gets it, she wakes up, and I know from my own experience that's usually when you know if it's going to go from being 4 out of 10 to 7 or 8 out of 10. It's when you wake up and you just feel this kind of stuff up there, you don't know what it is, but it's coming in, and it's going to get into your body, and it gets into your bones, and there is nothing you can do about it. And you just feel like lead. And you feel alive. You know you're alive because you're breathing. But you don't feel alive because you can't lift your eyelids. And you don't feel alive because you know you've got things in your diary, you've got phone calls to make, and you can't pick up the phone. And that's how it feels. And she said when she gets that feeling, she calls her elder daughter. She's got 2 kids. She's a single mum. Calls the elder daughter in, and she says, listen, darling, can you phone the ward, here's the number, and just say, your sister's ill. The daughter's used to it. She goes, she phones the ward, and she says, Mum can't come into work today because my little sister's not well. Then she calls the little sister in, and she says, listen, I'm really sorry, darling, but you can't go to school. Why not? And the reason is because she's worried if she takes her to school and drops her off, other nurses will see her, and they'll know that actually it's not true, that she's ill. So she's got to keep her off. So there's 3 people. One of them works in the National Health Service who is feels that stigma, feels that taboo so strongly that they have to lie. So those 2 kids are brought up to believe you've got to lie about your mum's illness. And it just shows you how far we've got to go. And we were just talking down here about the British election going on and Theresa May and who's going to win and da-da-da. And Theresa May made a speech recently about mental health. And she said something in it which I thought was... I've worked on a lot of speeches with politicians where I know they're saying something that at the end of the sentence, they're hoping for a round of applause. It's partly what you're saying, but it's also the way you deliver the sentence. As you build up and up and up and up, and eventually you make the point, and then you make the bigger point at the end of it, and then people clap. And the point she was making was a pledge. She made this pledge that within 4 years, 2021, no child who suffers a psychiatric distress that needs treatment in a hospital, no child will have to go outside their own area for treatment. Wow. She wants a round of applause for that. In 2 years, we're going to deliver Brexit. In 2 years, we can deliver the most complicated negotiation any Prime Minister has ever had to deal with. But it's going to take 4 years to stop a kid having to go from Birmingham to Newcastle, as happens now, or Edinburgh to Manchester, as happens now, it's ridiculous. And yet, in the National Health Service Constitution, and let me tell you, Britain is better than most countries. I think in mental health care it's probably better than Ireland, but still that shows how far we've got to go. And it's there. The Health Service Constitution says parity between physical and mental health. We don't have it. We don't have it. We can't have it if that nurse feels they can't even tell their boss that they have depression. So where have we got to go with it? David Cameron, he was another one. He made a speech about mental health, and it was a very good speech. Lots of good things in it. But he said something extraordinary. He said, he talked about parity. We've got to work towards parity between physical and mental health. And he made a pledge. He said, if you have psychosis, we will guarantee you get treatment within 2 weeks. Well, I'll tell you, I've had psychosis, and I've wondered a lot. I've thought a lot, what's the physical equivalent of psychosis? And the nearest I can get to it is you're driving down a motorway, breaking the speed limit by about 30 miles an hour, and you're not wearing a seatbelt, and you slam on the brakes because a lorry comes out in front of you, and you go through the windscreen, and you land on the floor, and you're rolling around, and you're not sure how many bones you've broken, you're not even sure where you are, what's going on. Just imagine if somebody comes along and says, don't you worry, somebody's going to see you in 2 weeks. That's what psychosis is like. It's an emergency. And I just think there's a real worry I have at the moment. I campaign for an organisation called Time to Change. It's all about trying to break down the stigma, strip away the taboo, make people feel that they can be as open about their mental health as they are about their physical health. And the Royals have got involved, and William and Harry and Kate with this Heads Together campaign, and it's really making progress. More and more people are feeling that they can be open. But my worry is that policymakers see that as a substitute for the services as opposed to an accompaniment. Now, I do believe that if we can get to this place that I want us to get to, that ultimately down the track there are savings to be made for governments. That if we can get people to look after their mental health properly, that actually they are going to have healthier, happier lives, and they're less likely to get physically ill as well. But that's a long-term thing, and we're nowhere near where we need to be on it. So that's why I campaign. And on psychosis, I mean, you know, I'll tell you a funny story actually, because you mentioned working for Tony Blair. When I first started working for Tony, so I'd had a breakdown in the 80s. I was drinking very, very heavily. I was a workaholic. I was working every hour that God sent, and I was getting out of control. I could feel it happening. But the more that people suggested to me, particularly my partner and my family, the more they said you're getting out of control, the worse it got. Because it doesn't help. I don't know what they should have said, but it doesn't help. It just pushes you further and further towards the edge. And eventually I got to the edge. And I was up in Scotland. I was covering a trip by Neil Kinnock, who was then the leader of the Labour Party up in Scotland. And I started feeling very, very weird. And I had a hire car, and I was on a roundabout. I was going round and round and round and round and round and round. And I couldn't steer the car off the roundabout. I don't know why, I just couldn't. Eventually I thought something kicked in, and I pulled myself off. And then I realized I wasn't fit to drive. I dumped the car, just dumped it. I phoned my office and said, I've left the car, you've got to pick it up. I found a taxi driver, took me to Perth. I'd lost Neil Kinnock by then. He'd moved on to Falkirk, got a lift. Eventually in Hamilton, I'm in this place in Hamilton, keep trying to catch him up. And I'm now starting to hear voices in my head. Bagpipes, brass bands, people having arguments. I asked for a phone, I want a phone home. Somebody takes me to a phone, pre-mobiles. I phone home, no reply. I phone my parents, no reply. I phone my brother, no reply. All the numbers that are in my head of all my mates, I phone, no reply. I even phoned Burnley Football Club, thinking there'd be somebody there, and at least I'll be able to talk to somebody I know. No reply. And I'm thinking, I'm feeling more and more weird that nobody is speaking to me. Of course, it was a Friday night. I hadn't realized, as soon as I pressed 0 on the phone, I was going through to the switchboard and there was nobody there. But in my madness, I'm just feeling more and more isolated. The noises are getting louder. Eventually, I start to empty my pockets on the floor. Don't ask me why, but I did. And I thought in my head I was being tested for my life. And if I failed the test, I was going to be killed, okay? Now look, I'm standing here now, I'm 60 tomorrow actually. God, what a horrible thought, I'm 60 tomorrow. Anyway, I'm still here. This was 1986, so I was clearly wrong that I was being tested, and if I failed the test, I was going to die. But that's what I thought. And I'm emptying my pockets of all the things I don't need. Passport, money, keys, don't need any of that stuff. And I'm building this little pile on the floor. I don't know why. And eventually 2 guys emerge in the corner, and they come over. I didn't have a clue who they were. They're both about my height, very well dressed. And one of them says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Do you know what? I don't think I am." And the other one said, "Do you think you should come with us?" I said, "I think I should." It was the first time I'd ever admitted that I wasn't Superman. And they could have been the Mormons, for all I knew. Turned out they were Special Branch. Next thing I know, I'm in the back of a police car. Next thing I know, I'm in a cell. Next thing I know, I've taken all my clothes off. Don't ask me why. And I'm banging the wall, and I'm going a bit even crazier. Next thing I know, Patricia Hewitt, who was Neil Kinnock's press secretary, phoned the police station and said, "Look, I don't know who you think he is, but he is who he says he is, and he's not well." Next thing I know, they found a friend of mine who lives 40 miles away up in Scotland. He's picked me up, he's taken me to hospital. Now, when I see people on the streets in London or in Dublin or in Belfast or in Glasgow, you see them in any big town or city now, people on the streets, I don't do God, but I do think there but for the grace of. Because I often think, I sometimes wake up in the middle of a dream. Just imagine if those 2 coppers who'd come over, just imagine, could have happened, just imagine I'd felt threatened and scared and I headbutted one of them. Where my life would have gone after that. Into the criminal justice system, probably into jail. And I look at these people on the streets and I think, they didn't start there. They were born, and then here we are 40, 50 years older, there they are on the streets. They didn't start there. They got there as part of a journey, then on that journey all sorts of stuff happened. But guaranteed on that journey, something happened that made them ill mentally. Every single one of them. I don't think there's a single one who hasn't had to deal with some sort of mental illness. And along the way, they've not had the help they need, they've not had the support that I had, they've not had the care that I had, they've not had the luck that I had. And here's a big thing with employers. Employers are so important in this. So Tony Blair, when he asked me to work for him, I said, "Listen, you know I had a breakdown, you know I had a problem with alcohol for a while, you know that I had psychosis." And he said, "Well, I'm not bothered if you're not bothered." And I said, "Well, what if I'm bothered?" He said, "I'm still not bothered." Now, a lot of employers do not have that attitude. Let's just be honest about that. And I say to a lot of employers, a lot of you guys, you're employers, this is your world, health, but you're employers. And I say to people, when you've got 2 identical CVs, both got good exams, both went to good university, both, travel the world a bit, both have worked as interns at banks or charities, whatever it might be. But this one here has got 6 months missing. And you discover that actually, that 6 months, they were in rehab because they had a drug problem. Or like me, age 28, they had a breakdown. And I say to employers, listen, you play safe, you go for that one. You're actually looking for people who might be a bit more resilient, who might actually have more empathy because they've been through stuff. Just think about it. And what's more, they've got honesty because they're going to tell you on that 6 months, that was when I had a real struggle, but they got through it. So we've got to change the telescope on this. We've got to start to think about this, not just as all mental illness is terrible. It is terrible on one level. But if I say to you, there's Trump parading around as though he's a serious president. Who's the greatest president in history? Lincoln. Lincoln was chronically depressed. Who's the greatest British Prime Minister? I might want you to shout out Tony Blair as one, but you're more likely to say that Winston Churchill. Who coined the phrase black dog? Winston Churchill. I can go right through history and give you people who were great people, not necessarily just despite their mental health problems, but maybe, think about this, because of them. Because it gives them something a bit special. Martin Luther King, he was bipolar. And there's a friend of mine who's written a book basically saying, Martin Luther King, the empathy that he had, the ability to feel what black Americans felt in the civil rights movement, that came in part from his ability to feel real pain because of his depression. And his mania, that gave him the energy, the charisma, the ability to go without sleep, the ability, whatever the setback, to say, I'm going to carry on fighting. And that's how you have to think about this. And I do see this. I see this mental health campaign in the same light as gay rights, as smoking, as civil rights, as women voting, women's rights. I see it in that field. It's the last great stigma. It's the last great taboo. And we've got to break it down. And I'll close on this. We've got a few minutes for questions, but I'll close on this. When I was growing up, 50 years ago now, I can remember my mum, growing up in Yorkshire, I can remember my mum saying, our next door neighbour had cancer, the guy, and she said, you mustn't tell anybody. Now, that was the mores of that time. It was the big C. We didn't talk about it. Well, we do talk about it now. And like I said earlier, if I had no hair, I'd still turn up and I'd be perfectly fine, and so would you. Because the language has changed, the understanding has changed. And it only changed because people made it change. Why was it ever called the big C? Why did we ever not want to talk about it? And here's another thing. One of the reasons why cancer services are now better, why cancer research can make so much money to fight, to campaign, to research, to try to get the cures and the treatments that we need, is because the taboo is gone. And we've got to do the same with mental health. And every single one of us, we go on about 1 in 4 of us have mental health problem, maybe, but 1 in 1 of us has mental health. Every single one of us has mental health. Some days good, some days less good. And until we think like that, then the policymakers can prattle on all they want. We're not going to get to where we need to. Thank you very much. Right, sorry, I waffled on a bit too long there, so I've only got a few minutes. Yeah? Question. First question. Do you getting dressed to leave, or do you want to show you? Oh, you're cold. Okay, right. Okay. Yes, sir.
Hi, Mark Regan, Chief Executive of Kingsbridge Private Hospital in Belfast. I'm a whisperer, yes, frequently a whisperer, usually for selfies, like someone of yourself at the end once they've gone, but yes, for the mental health aspect in all seriousness, to ask questions. I speak infrequently on it, once or twice a year, but last week it came home when a very close relative ended up in a mental health institution in Belfast. So I share all of the things you said around access. Now, my own personal issue around it was, as you say, if she'd have broken an ankle, she would have went to A&E and they would have known what to do, a trauma surgeon, a radiographer, everyone would have fallen into place. But when she arrived, she was 26 hours because no one knew what to do. The GP didn't know, social work didn't know. When she was told to go to A&E, they didn't know, and she spent 26 hours, even with me and my phone book with all of the consultants able to touch it. But my question to you is, whenever I try to verbalise it at the conferences, I suspect the problem is the NHS and healthcare, us, ourselves, that if you look at any wall in any hospital, there'll be dermatology, radiology, cardiology, orthopaedics, and you won't see the mental health because it's somewhere separate. Yeah. And if you look at the budgets, there's the primary care and secondary care budget, and then there's the mental health budget. Absolutely. Why do we not have mental health just as one of the ologies? Would that fix the problem, in your opinion?
It would definitely help to. And in answer to your question, why do we have it, is back to the point about stigma. You don't, I mean, you get this as well. You get it, I think you get it with sexually transmitted disease as well. Sort of, people don't particularly want to be seen going into the place where you might get treated for that. And likewise, I think people want to sort of, you know, they just want to make it, they think they're making it easier for people by covering it up. And you're absolutely spot on. And it's not just, if I think about, when you think about money, at the moment with the health service under real pressure, they can pick off bits and pieces of mental health spending. You're not going to get the kind of the outpouring of anger because people don't want to stand up and shout and scream. Well, I stand up and shout and scream. And I encourage others to stand up and shout and scream. Because until we do that, people can get away with it. So And within the healthcare sector, I saw a fascinating thing. The thing about when you get into campaigns like this, people send you amazing stuff that just sort of arrives. And somebody sent me this academic research that had been done in Norway, where they'd interviewed medical students around the world about where they they produce what they call the hierarchy of disease prestige. And at the top was brain surgery. If you could go up and say, I'm a brain surgeon, that was like, and then the next one, which I think means heart attack, it was something infarction. That was the next one. And then blood cancer was number 3, which fine. Down the bottom, literally, the bottom 5 were all the mental health. Now, I actually think if you're a medical student, I was amazed by that, because maybe this is my bias, but I just loved to, if I was a medical student, I think that's the place to go. But they don't. So your point about the ologies, they've got to be up there, deemed within the service to be as important as any other. And we're miles off it, miles off it. Yes, lady there.
What contributed most to your recovery? Was it early intervention, was it medication, or was it the fact that you got employment?
I'll tell you what helped my recovery. One was, obviously, you know, people always say you've got to hit your own rock bottom. I think that rock bottom for me was actually the moment, this is pure luck, the moment when those 2 coppers came up to me. I was willing to sort of concede my own self to somebody else. And I took that approach in hospital as well. So when the psychiatrist came along and said, listen, you've got to stop drinking. And I stopped drinking. I didn't drink for 13 and a half years. And I drink occasionally now, but not very much. But I was also, I'd never even met my GP. I didn't even know my GP. I was really fit. But I trusted my GP. I found the people that I felt I could trust to sort of help me. Massive support was family and friends. But I'll tell you, when I talk about employers, one of the first phone calls I got in hospital was a guy called Richard Stott, who'd been my boss at the Daily Mirror, which I'd left to go to the newspaper where I was now on. And he'd been really, really angry. It was almost like, don't darken my door again. And it was one of the first phone calls I got. And word for word, it went like this. He said, I hear you've gone mad. I said, well, I'm not well. I'm in hospital. He said, right, well, I'm not going to say I told you so, which is a way of saying I told you so. But here's what you got to do. Stay there as long as you have to stay there. Go back to today for as long as you want to. Take the money for as long as you can. And as soon as you're back to being fit and strong, come back here. But he said, I want you to start back at the bottom again. That helped my recovery more than anything. The fact that he, who had been my boss before, and all he knew was that I'd been committed to mental health establishments. All he knew, it was him saying, I don't care what's the issue. That is not going to define you for me. That was as big a thing as anything. So I say employers are so important. Yeah, was it?
Alastair, I'm a GP, and GPs get sometimes a bit of a hard time on mental health.
Yeah.
And I think quite justified in some cases, but I know also the pressures that we're under.
Yeah.
Do you think primary health care, first of all, needs to change dramatically in order to try and reduce the stigma? Or do you feel actually this reduction of stigma is going to be much more societal, which will then be kind of followed by the healthcare?
I think the societal bit is really important. So I think these campaigns, I do think, I mean, I'm a Republican of the British sort, not the Irish sort, although Brexit, getting there. But the Royals getting involved, I think has been given it a big impetus. But I'll tell you, I mean, I feel sorry for GPs. If I was, look, whenever I go to my GP, you know that they're pressed for time. You know that you're seeing them for a cold, the next person is seeing you for eczema, the next person is seeing you because, you know, their kid's in pain and they don't know what it is, and you've got 5-10 minutes, and you've got a waiting room full of people. I think that what GPs should have is the ability to say, and you also know, by the way, this is a pressure on you as a GP, if you've got somebody reporting with what you are seeing as sort of depression or anxiety type illness, You know there are certain pills that you can get them off your back. I'm not saying that's how you think, but that's what happens, and we know that happens. And I think you should have the ability to be able to say, well, look, I'm very much a general practitioner, but within this surgery, we do have the nurse, the psychologist, the psychiatrist, and you can make that judgment about where they go. And like I say, we just don't have it. And my own GP, who are brilliant, they've just had to lay off 2 members of staff, and the first person they picked on was the alcohol counsellor. Because it's easy. Because in the end, we don't have the same sympathy for an alcoholic as we do for somebody who's got cancer. But that illness is going to cause way more pain, way more cost to the public exchequer, in terms of, if they're not treated, in terms of the problems that they're going to cause down the track. Yeah.
I used to work here, but I'm in public health in Wales. Firstly, just
Wales?
In Wales, yeah.
Okay.
You know that?
Yeah, I know Wales.
The bit that England's stuck on the side of.
The bit that England might be left with once Northern Ireland and Scotland have decided, you know what?
I'll see you after. Look, firstly, genuinely to say thank you so much for sharing your story. It's just really powerful, and it was inspirational. So thank you. As I say, I work in public health, and we have the pleasure of working strongly with young ambassadors. And to launch a conference with us about a year ago, we had 2 18-year-olds on the stage with 500 people, one of whom told his story about mental health, aged 18, and how his mates got him involved. He didn't want to go out. He was a recluse in his own bedroom, and it was physical activity for him. So I guess my point is, we've probably missed a generation of attempting to destigmatize, perhaps, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop. It's your thoughts about how young people create a new conversation about this, because I think they will liberate the conversation.
Oh, I totally agree with that. I totally agree. I mean, I've got 3 kids. You know, 2 of them have had issues that they've been totally open about. I've got a son who's 27, who's had treatment for alcoholism age 23, and he's not had a drink since. I've got a daughter who has written openly about, she was studying abroad, and she was getting massive panic attacks, and she had to come back, and she's written very, very openly about it. And I think you're totally right. That generation is going to just break down the walls of taboo and stigma because they don't really understand them. They don't understand. And I'll tell you, the other thing, I think this whole thing about social media, I mean, it is changing the way that young people communicate with each other, and that is having a lot of impact. Some of it for good, a lot of it for bad. The whole thing about, you know, young girls and eating disorders and body image and all this stuff, it's stuff that we didn't really have to deal with. So I think that is going to break it down. But I wish it wasn't so. I wish that actually the older generation could realize we shouldn't have to be dealing with this. We should be there already, and we're not. We're so far behind where we need to be.
Thanks very much. Kieran O'Boyle from the College of Surgeons. The really scary thing is that the age of onset of depression is getting younger and younger, so it's essentially becoming a disease of adolescence, and looking at a lifelong trajectory for that. I don't believe this can be dealt with solely by the health services. I think the education services are extremely important. And evidence is emerging now from positive psychology movement, particularly in the United States, that we can teach well-being skills in schools. So I think, yes, the health services, but we need far more intervention in education. I'd like to know what you think about that, Alastair.
Well, I totally agree. You see, I think this is where it's heading. Those 2 questions, actually, they're 2 parts of the same argument. And just as a lot of GPs, I think, don't have the skills. I'm not criticising GPs. I think they do an amazing job, but a lot of them don't have the skills. They don't have time to learn new skills. They don't have time to study new research. They don't have the time to really take on board, because this is such a big area. And schools, you know, I feel so sorry for teachers who are having to, teach kids, deal with far more demanding, often far more aggressive parents, deal with social issues and problems that are being brought into the classroom, deal particularly in the UK now, with issues to do the whole respect agenda about, you know, spotting signs of the radicalisation and all this sort of stuff that's going on. They've got so much to deal with. And then suddenly you say to them, oh, and by the way, you've also got to educate the kids in mental health, mental illness, and mental well-being, and you've got to spot the signs, and you've got to deal with it then. So hard. But I agree with you. Unless we do that, and just as I think the GP needs support in helping, so does the teacher. And yet, austerity, 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 we're cutting back on that sort of thing. I mean, in the UK at the moment, the whole thing about having assistants in the classroom, they can be given specific tasks. Might be to deal with a couple of support a couple of special needs kids who keep them in the mainstream system. It might be because there are you know, dietary issues that they're looking at. So all of these things we're expecting our teachers to deal with. But I do think that on the education, there's a brilliant book you should look up, by the way. It's called Scrambled Eggs. And it's a young kid has written this book. It's just cartoons and words. But it's a young kid who's had mental health problems, and they've written this book called Scrambled Eggs, and it's becoming a bit of a thing. So once you've got all my 12 books off Amazon, then get Scrambled Eggs. But it's you know, that sort of educative role is not just a part of breaking down the stigma, which it is, but it's also how do we get to a point where the child who goes into school feeling like they have a real problem, feeling that they can't admit it to their parents, they can't admit it to their friends, they can't admit it to their teacher. How do we get to a place where actually they feel they can, and what's more, that of itself is going to make them feel better? So those two totally related. Any more? Are we done?
I think we could listen to you all day, Alastair.
No, you can't because my voice is going.
There's, I think, can we give Alastair a round of applause?
Thank you, thank you.
As Tracy said, thank you for sharing that with such honesty, and thank you everyone for all the questions. I'm sure you'll have lots of whisperers coming over to you at the end of this session, and happy birthday for tomorrow. Hope you have a great day.